Joe, basically, before I start, people are going to be seeing this book all across LinkedIn. It's being publicized everywhere. And I want, I don't want to start this podcast with discussion about what inspired you to write this book, but I want to get your 2 cents in what do you want people to get from this book when they do purchase it?
Yeah. Well, I mean, overall, I think what I want people to understand and walk away with is that I don't think that there's any better or more comprehensive guide to simple, practical, easy, low lift methods that work inside corporate reality. Places where you don't ever have enough time or enough personnel or enough budget or enough approval to do any of the things that you need to do in order to design appropriately for people. I think that there's an awful lot out there for people about UX process and practice, and all of it requires a perfect world situation where you always have that time, you always have that money, you always have that approval, you have executive support, and you have a team around you. And in my travels over the last 3 decades, that is rarely the case. Now, that's what gets all the airtime, right, online. But that's rarely the case. So I felt that way when Leah's first edition came out, a decade plus ago. And that aspect of this book, I think, is even more amplified at this point, because this is definitely where we are as a profession.
But see, this is where you make a fundamental statement. And I think it's in the beginning. It's actually one of the beginning topics, like, UX and its evolution. And actually, you mentioned something, because everyone talks about Norman, Don Norman and Jacob Nielsen. But you mentioned about Frederick Winslow Taylor in there, which a lot of people don't know about. So do you want to explain who Frederick is to our audience who don't know who he is?
Yeah, and that credit goes to Leah, because she, Taylorism was sort of, in my mind, the first aspects of what we consider to be UX, designing appropriately for people. And I also, I want to take that back even further, in that I went to school back in the 80s for graphic design. And a lot of the principles we learned of graphic design go as far back as the 1940s. But all of it was centered around human behavior, cognitive understanding, how people perceive things, why certain things are useful to them and why they aren't, right? Why do we gravitate towards certain things and adopt them? And why do we, turn our noses at other things? So I think all of these principles are kind of timeless. I think that for whatever reason, some of the more modern takes on user experience don't account for that history. So that's again, I think one of the aspects of this book that's important is the sort of mini history lesson at the beginning, so that you understand where this came from, number one, and also so that you understand this isn't a new thing. Yeah. It's got a new name, certainly, right? When Norman coined the term, when people like Jesse James Garrett popularized it in his book, The Elements of User Experience. But none of this is really all that new in terms of theory and practice.
But then that ties into my next question. Why has UX not evolved where the business see value and put resources into it? From your perspective, I know I'm going to go a bit off track, but I really want to get your 2 cents in it, because you do speak about the evolution of UX. But why has UX not evolved to have a seat at the top table to show business value? And why, as you mentioned, because the book mentions about how to deal with when you don't have the resources and backing by business, and how do you show value? But why do you think the UX industry has not evolved to show business value?
I think there's 2 parts to that. There's 2 parts to that answer, and one of them is an unpopular answer in the UX community. The first answer is there are lots of other departments and other ways of doing things in business that have been there longer than we have. The dev side of the house, the tech side of the house, the IT side of the house has been there longer than we have. So they got in, they sort of got a foothold, and I don't mean any of this in a bad way. They sort of became the keeper of the keys to that kingdom, to product development, to tech, especially when software became a thing. Back when the the web started happening in earnest, back when the 2000s and the dot-com boom, tech was it, because you had no bridge. If you were a business, you had no bridge to getting in on web-enabled or software-enabled anything unless you had tech folks in-house. So number one, we're new.
Okay.
As long as UX has been a thing, we are still new in terms of history. Okay, we'll go back to that. We are still new as a profession. So that legitimacy is not quite there yet. It's getting there. It's been steadily going there, okay, since the term was coined. So that's the first part of the equation, is that we're butting up against established ways of doing things that kind of aren't ready to bend for us yet.
Okay.
The second part of the equation is that historically, you actually have done a pretty bad job of talking about the business side of the house amongst ourselves, to our clients, to our employers, to our everybody. UX in general, I think inadvertently, okay, I don't know that anybody does this on purpose, but this profession as a whole has inadvertently proceeded as if it was the center of the universe. Okay, we are the arbiters of what is. You're going to listen to what I tell you. Now, are we experts in that sense where we have that knowledge that nobody else has? Yes, that's a true statement. But you can't insert yourself in an existing process and expect everybody to stop what they're doing, what they've been doing for 40 years, to suddenly turn it all on its head and say, oh, well, we have UX now, so we have to change everything. It's not going to happen, okay? Just for purely time and space and reasons of physics, okay? There's too much infrastructure in place. So I just think that we haven't given enough time or space or words, communication, to the idea of how do we deal with what is? How do we fit ourselves into what already exists instead of trying to make the world bend for us? How do you deal with the reality of the situation? What I love about this book, and this echoes everything I've ever done in my teaching and training and consulting career as well, is that it does not pretend that the world is perfect at all. It says, look, you're going to run into situations where things aren't what you think they should be. No problem. Don't waste a second of your life worrying about that or complaining about it or being upset about it. There's always a way forward, always. And this is it. So again, that's why when Lou called me and said, would you be interested in helping bring this second edition to life? I was, before the sentence was even out of his mouth, I said, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Because this book was that a decade ago. It was already preaching that gospel. So for me, this was a no-brainer, right? It was a book I already wished I'd written. So to have the chance to be part of this was like, absolutely, I'm in. Count me in.
So one bit of the book actually mentions, a lot about the challenges of the UX team of one. And I wanted to get your 2 cents in what are the key strategies needed for overcoming organizational resistance? Because there's a big section about that, where I think a lot of people in this struggle right now, and that's the one that resonated with me. That was the bit where I was like, wow, how do you overcome this?
Yeah, the bottom line is this: anybody you're talking to has to see how what you're proposing benefits them. Okay, it has to communicate. Look, here's how what I'm proposing gets you what you already want. But here's part of that issue is this, and I have this conversation every week with teams, with people I coach. You can't have that substantive conversation unless you've done the legwork to figure out what's important to them in the first place. Right. So again, I'll pivot back to some of the methods and processes in this book. You'll read things about how to find out from stakeholders what is actually important to them. Without that knowledge, you can preach all day long about good UX and best practices and what is good design and what will make users happy, right? What will make them hopefully buy more, purchase more, download more. Those arguments will fall flat unless that person hears something that speaks to what they are already on the hook for. Right? But their bosses are looking down at them and saying, all right, you better hit this mark by the end of the next quarter.
Yeah.
Who knows what depends on that? Could be their job. Could be their performance bonus. It could be, a pay cut in salary. Like, if we don't make these numbers, here's what's going to happen to this entire department. You don't know. So you have to be speaking the right language. I think we tend to get wrapped up in our own goals,
Mm-hmm.
right? User experience is all about users, 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 users. I don't know that I agree with that. I think it's to me, it's business first, user second, because if the business doesn't see the point of any of this, you don't have a prayer
Yeah.
of moving any of this stuff through. I mean, you just don't. The last thing I want to say about that is that sometimes that thing that they want is not necessarily a company-wide goal. It's not necessarily, it's personal. Sometimes it's personal. Sometimes when people give you opposition, there's fear there.
Yes.
You know?
That's common. I think, product managers given their 2 cents and feedback, or how you mentioned opposition, there's that fear of change, or am I taking the risk, or am I making the right move? And you hit the nail on the head. Preaching just the UX stuff just falls flat. But if you bring the business language into your design and your ideas, you hit the notes, as you just mentioned. You hit the key things they're interested in and what they're looking for. And I think that's what's missing, in my opinion, in the field. We know good UX, we know good design, but we don't know good language or business language to tie in that UX.
I agree. I mean, if you look at product managers, okay, as a whole, let's just take that role.
Yeah.
I don't know a single product manager in all the time I've been doing this. I've never met one who wasn't under unbelievable pressure. They are expected. Here's what nobody realizes. They're expected by their higher ups to have all the answers to everything without doing research, quite frankly. All right. So they're put in a very unfair situation. They're supposed to know everything about customers. They're supposed to know everything about product design. They're supposed to know everything about development. They're supposed to be able to bring all these people together and somehow manage all aspects of everything. So a lot of people will say to me, well, our PMs are making decisions without us, or they're doing the research and we're not allowed to do the research. They're being put in a position where somebody is saying to them, you have to go do this because your neck is on the line for what you commit to. Okay. Product managers are charged with writing user stories, requirements.
Yep.
And a lot of them feel like, I don't know if I'm right about it. And the problem is nobody ever stops to just have a conversation to say to that person, how do I help you?
Mm-hmm.
Or go to them and say, I know you're under a lot of pressure to figure all this out. I have some tools in my skill set. I can help you do that. I can help you get to a lot more certainty about the answers. Okay. When researchers, for example, tell me that whenever we propose research, it gets shot down. And I say, well, what are you telling them? You say, well, we need to know more about our customers and this and that. That's the wrong speech. The speech is, I know you're going to place a bet anyway on this set of features. What if I told you that I could greatly minimize the risk that bet is going to not pay off, okay, and that you're going to be in debt, and I could maximize the percent, the likelihood that is going to pay off, that bet is going to pay off. That's a very different conversation. You're not preaching about your discipline anymore or the benefits of it anymore. You're saying to another human being, I know you're going to do this anyway, and I know you're worried about the outcome. I can help you be more certain. That's a very different conversation.
Absolutely. I think a lot of researchers don't bring that sentence into play, that I can minimize your risk. And that is what I think is the best sentence for UX researchers. But what's happening, in my opinion, and obviously I'm going to dive back into this in your book, but what I do see is that product managers use researchers only to validate ideas. They don't use it for illumination.
Yeah.
It's a very often thing. And as you just mentioned, when I've asked researchers, have you ever used a sentence that you are going to minimize the risk? I would say 8 out of 10 of them, 10 of them would say no. We have not.
It's not their fault. Okay. It's just, you're not taught to operate that way. Like nobody inside this profession. I mean, nobody talks about this. Nobody.
Yeah.
So we all operate on what we think are a good set of best practices. And they are if you work in a vacuum. But the minute you work with other people, the game changes. So I have the same conversation that you just described. with a lot of people, and they're sort of genuinely surprised when I say that. And I've had people look at me and say, as goofy as this sounds, like I can't believe I never thought to frame this differently, but I haven't. I just assumed that they hired me to do this job. They should let me do it. And I agree with that completely. No one should have to go through all this agony just to be able to do their job. But this is reality, okay? My thing is, it doesn't have to be perfect. You have to deal with what it is.
You mentioned this, and you mentioned this also towards the end of the book about evangelism and spreading UX awareness. Now, I'm going to dive into something which you mentioned here. Help your colleagues understand that UX is a frame of mind, and this activity will help get them in that frame of mind.
Yeah.
Now, I want to
Leah.
take a
That's
stab
100% Leah.
And you know what? They should actually come with notes who said what, and then I could definitely pinpoint. But I want to take a stab at this because and you can tell me if I'm right or wrong, Joe. This is what the whole point of this podcast is about. Like, really, like, am I going in the right direction? But what I've always found is that when people who are hired in these type of roles, UX researching, or UX design, why is there a need for us to educate what we do? Shouldn't hiring managers know what we do? Because what I see a lot in the industry is that we're constantly having to educate our value, like what we do. I don't see a lot of people saying we have to educate the value of our end product. It's literally, we have to sell ourselves when we get into the job. So I want to take your 2 cents on that.
Yeah.
Because, yeah.
And let's go here. I'll say this again. This book was the first edition of this book was written over a decade ago. That stuff about evangelism was in there a decade ago. You know what that means? It means that we were having to prove ourselves then, and we're having to prove ourselves now. That tells me that there is a fundamental disconnect in understanding this discipline. And like I said, I think there's 2 culprits, right? Part of the culprit is the rest of the business is moving so fast, even historically, that everybody's heads down doing their thing and they're just leaning on what they know. Okay, we've always done this way. These people always play these roles. Sales always does this. Marketing always does this. IT always does this, et cetera, et cetera. And it's just charging ahead. And the other thing, like I said, is that I think that we have not done ourselves any favors by having the right kinds of conversations. Now, to your point, should we have to explain and justify our value? No, we shouldn't.
Yeah.
There's no question about that. Shouldn't hiring managers know what we do? Of course they should. Shouldn't bosses understand what we do? Of course they should. But they don't. Okay? And part of me says, look, I'm not interested in the reason this hasn't changed in a decade. I don't care. I just want to solve it. I want to solve it right now. And I want to try to give people ammunition, something that they can use to have those conversations in a productive manner so that the person on the other side can hear them, right? Is actually listening and understanding in a way like, oh, okay. I say this all the time, and I think the book makes this case.
Mm-hmm.
If you're a UX or a product designer of any kind, those people that you work with do not understand that they can get more from you than what they're getting. They really are unaware that you could do a hell of a lot more for them, that they would care a hell of a lot more about.
Yeah.
Than this much of your talent that you're using right now. They literally don't know. So,
that's one thing. Sorry to cut you off there, but that is the key thing I loved about this book. It doesn't tell you like, oh, think about the end result, and that's what's going to get you the value. You show methods, and sorry, I've got so many notes all over the place here. I am just literally trying to piece them together, but I think one of the things I loved about it is teaching you skills that you just mentioned to show the value and to have the right conversation and the practical methods that you can do in your day-to-day work where every single thing will bring value. and you don't have to educate people and say, this is what I do. You know?
I mean, if you go on social media right now, all right, and you look at, like I've posted about the book, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
And there was one conversation where I posted about it, and Jesse James Garrett weighed in, and a bunch of other people weighed in. And a lot of those folks were at Adaptive Path when Leah first gave a presentation, okay, that is what turned into this book. And there were a lot of people who chimed in on that post who were there in the room that day. And they all say to a person, this was just the most amazing thing I had ever seen, because it brought everything that had been swirling around about, user experience and how do we practice this. It brought it all down into a tangible, practical, applicable level. Here's how we do this.
Mm-hmm.
It went from being, this abstract theory of like, how do we do that? And she made it palatable and understandable and simple for everyone that was there. Right? So it's no wonder that Rosenfeld jumped at this, when the idea to turn it into a book came along. That's a rare skill.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. There have only been a couple things that I've ever read in my life that have done that. Leah's first edition of this book did that for me. Jesse James Garrett's The Elements of User Experience did that for me. And the other big book, Steve Krug's Don't Make Me Think. These were all plain English, like, let's cut the bullshit. Here's how this works.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let's demystify this. Let's bring it down to earth so that people can actually do it.
Yeah.
Right? So that is what this is in a nutshell. I just think it's I'm gushing, I realize.
No, but you should be because I have read a lot of books, and Joe, we only met up 2 weeks ago, I would say, and in that 2 weeks I had enough time just to skim the book, and in that time there's so much in there, and just me from a skimming level. From a skimming level, there's so much in there that resonates with me, resonates with what we believe in, what DesignOps Alliance believes in. And I can imagine if I read it through thoroughly, like word for word, I think the value that it can bring people that are listening to this podcast and generally people who are buying this book, I think there's so much that will uplift this industry and people in this industry. And I'm not just saying it just because you're on my podcast. I'm saying it because
I appreciate that.
No, it was enlightening, I would say. And I'm lost for words. I'm actually lost for words.
And I agree with that. I mean, don't get me wrong. I completely agree with you. We were joking, okay, as we were going through the second edition, as we were in the process of putting it together. I mean, we were joking that this book probably should have been called, even the first edition probably should have been called, like, everything you could ever possibly want to know about practicing UX. It is a 101 book.
It is.
Right.
Yeah.
And not just for people who are total solo practitioners, but for anybody who finds themselves in a situation where it's less than perfect, right? Where you're struggling to get things done. You're struggling to incorporate better UX practices, better design practices. It's everything to me. And that's what I love about it. And that's why I was so thrilled to be a part of it.
Joe, I'm going to play devil's advocate because I always got to have a balance when it comes to stuff like this. And I think one of the key things that I've noticed is that the market right now, the job industry in UX is really, really dire at the moment. It's really tough. Of all the cuts that are being made, it's on social media. And I've spoken to a lot of people, and what I have noticed is that they don't advocate for UX principles because fear of losing their job. What do you say about that? And I know it's such a big question, but it's something that resonates with a lot of people. They don't want to speak up because and let me put this in a better way, they don't want to speak up on their true values because they find just executing on demand will keep a target off their head. Now, what would you say about that? And how does this book advocate for people to get over that?
I think it goes along with what we said before. Okay. It's not, speaking up is not what gets you fired. The thing that causes the ripple is speaking up in a way where the other person interprets it as, we need to do all this differently, or you're doing it wrong, or, and please understand, nobody says that out loud. This is not about what you're actually saying, or it's not about the fact that you are wrong, that UX should be better. It's not wrong that we should do more research. It's not wrong that we actually need more time to design this thing properly and appropriately and make sure that we're putting something out there that is going to help people and not possibly hurt them. Those are all real things. But again, what you have to advocate for is not any of those things. Anything that lands as this is going to be more time, more money, more expense, more risk is not going to fly. So again, the conversation can't be about any of that stuff. The conversation has to be, I think there's a way that we could minimize our risk here, that we're making the wrong, decisions, or that we're not going to have this thing built properly by the deadline. All right, let's just go there. From a tactical standpoint, it's two people saying, look, man, I'm concerned that we're not going to get there, and this thing is going to be half baked, and we're going to be forced to launch it next Friday. So I need a couple hours here or there, just again, 2 hours, just to do this and this, just to make sure that we're not making a mistake here. All right. It's things like that. It's incremental asks. When you ask in those situations, in a volatile situation, especially in a situation where people don't listen to you, it has to be in a way that justifies an outcome. And it also has to be small.
Yeah.
People often say, well, we need to do a week of research. If you're in an organization where it's very clear that you're never going to get that time, that's not what you ask for. You say, I would like to spend half a day doing research, and we're going to do it in this way so that it does not slow anything down. Nothing is going to stop, right? If we do this, the reason I want to do it is because I think we, as a team, as a product team, as a company, we are at risk here, right? Or the conversation could be, I think we're going to spend 3 weeks trying to build this. I don't know that it's necessary. I don't know that it's worth building in the first place, right? I mean, I've had plenty over my history, conversations with teams and with stakeholders in the room to say, let's prove this concept out right now. Let's do it quick. I've had developers do quick mock-ups as we're talking, as we're drawing on the whiteboard, to get to the point where like, holy shit, that's going to take 3 weeks at best to build. And then we don't know if it's going to integrate with this other piece. So the decision is made right there. Table it. We're not doing that. Yeah. You just shaved 3 weeks off a product development sprint, development life cycle in general. You know how much money that saves?
Massive.
That's a case you can make. Okay, so it's about it's not about arguing or advocating for stuff. It's about saying to people, I can help you. I can alleviate some of this pressure. I think that there are things we're doing we don't necessarily have to be doing. It's waste.
Yeah.
Part of what you're doing, if you're talking to a product manager, for example, you're giving that person ammunition that makes them look like a hero when they take it to somebody else. Okay? That's how you do this. And here's my other thing I want to say about the layoffs. I personally, and what I've seen in the last 3 years in particular, I don't think any of these layoffs have anything to do with people's performance or people rocking the boat or any of that stuff. I think it is a simple matter of laying off people is the fastest way to change numbers on a spreadsheet. It's the fastest way to make sure that people get their quarterly performance bonuses. It's the best way to juice the stock price. It's the best way to change your quarterly earnings, make the board happy, whatever it is. But none of those reasons, and I've had some inside conversations with people in places as well, none of those things have anything to do with people's performance or the fact the company is hurting for money. None of it. It's easy. It's a no-risk situation. The company says to themselves, look, if we have to hire some people back, we'll get contractors. No big deal. We're always going to be first on the chopping block. Always.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things where at the moment it's so delicate in the industry. Nobody wants to make anyone unhappy. And I think UX is
I get
always
that.
the one, yeah, it's always the one that gets the finger pointed because we're the ones at the end kind of thing. We're the ones that kind of deliver the end result. So we're the ones that are the scapegoats, in my opinion. And that's why I personally feel that that's pretty much what the temperature at the moment is with UX designers, that they just feel if we just execute on demand, then we're fine. And
You're not.
but yeah,
You're
you
not any
mentioned that.
safer.
Yeah.
You're not safe at all until somebody on executive decision-making end realizes your impact on money made or money saved.
Mm.
That's when you become safe. Period. And if that is not transparent, you're always going to be at risk.
Enjoying the content? Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on LinkedIn, TikTok, and Instagram for more updates. Your support helps us bring you even more great content. Now let's get back to our podcast.
I want to take 2 steps back at what you just mentioned. I think it's kind of a common theme that I'm seeing as we talk through this podcast, that communication is key in this industry. And again, you can tell me if I'm right or wrong, Joe. I feel that currently people that are learning this industry, that are coming through boot camps and coming through various different ways to join the industry, are not being taught the value of communication. My 2 cents is that they're just shown the 10% of the job, the 10, 15% of the job. But what I see is that we're missing that ability to communicate value. We're missing that ability to storytell. We're missing that ability to negotiate, as well as work with cross-functional teams, And you make a good point here. Actually, there's a very good point that you mentioned, the design methods for UX. It's kind of what I've categorized it.
Mm-hmm.
And you mentioned to involve cross-functional teams in the design process. Now, again, I'm not speaking for the whole market. I'm just speaking from my experience. I find that designers do not bring developers in, or they don't bring the right people. What would you say to people that are listening to this podcast to advocate in bringing cross-functional team and the benefits it brings?
I think that when that doesn't happen, people feel alienated from the process. I think that builds opposition. I think that it builds resentment. Okay. Not because you're doing anything wrong, but because over time you have these people doing this thing over here and these people doing this thing over here. Neither one really knows what the other one's doing. All they know is that every couple of weeks they come together and they're like, what is this? And the other side goes, what is this? And so one side is like, you take too long to do stuff, or you're designing stuff that we can't build. And the other side says, that looks nothing like what we spent the last 2 weeks working on. Like, what's going on? I just think that traditional methods and processes and silos set people up for opposition, period. When people work in vacuums, there is natural opposition. I grew up learning how to fix things, to build things. My father is an amazing carpenter. He's a mechanic. He's an engineer. He can fix anything. And what he always told me when you're working together, he said, you want another person with you so that before you make a decision about something, you say, all right, here's what I think I want to do here. I'm going to do A, B, C, and D because these reasons. What do you think? Does that sound right? And the other person goes, yeah, except for, I think you might be in trouble here because A, B, and C. And then you work it out. All right. So I want people, I hate the separation between UX and design. They should be working like this all the time, next to each other in the same room, or at least checking in virtually a couple times a day. Here's what I got. Here's what I'm thinking. What do you think? Does that paint you in any corners? Is this possible? Is it possible to build? And the developer goes, no, but I have a module that works something like that. So it could probably be this. And he shows me an example. And I go, all right, you know what? That'll work. We got 2 weeks to figure this out. That'll work. I can go with that. This is what I do as a consultant as well when I work with teams. I want stuff being proved out right now in the moment. We're not going to go away and do this design and come back. No, we're doing it right now together as a group to figure out what's worth doing and what's possible and what makes the most sense. This is all compromise, and we pretend that it isn't. Mm-hmm. Both sides, development and design and UX, we all pretend that there's no compromise involved here. there are trade-offs, and it's impossible to make any of those trade-offs if people are working in separate parts of the universe. I saw a talk once by Dan Mall and I think it was Brad Frost. And I remember this phrase. They said, put everybody everywhere. And I went, yes, that's it. I mean, so yeah, involve developers upstream. I don't care if they're inviting you to their party or not. Invite them to yours. Save yourself some headache at the very least.
Yeah, this is also, it also comes down to when you try to bring developers, sometimes it's really hard to get their involvement due to, and good UX is always kind of like ahead of the game. So whether you work in a PI or a certain release schedule, the UX team is always ahead. And I have seen teams where they're designing and developing at the same time, which is completely bonkers in my opinion. But but that's my 2 cents. I always like design teams to be ahead because then they can test and validate. But I always find that when they do work in that way, it's hard to get developers time or involvement because they're so committed to that PI or that release. And it's like, hey, I can only come like 1 hour in 3 weeks or 4 weeks. And it's like, hey, we would like to get you involved in the ideation process.
Yeah, which is why the whole thing has to change. I'll say this. I think that the work should happen simultaneously. There's certain aspects of UX work that kind of has to happen in advance. I totally get that.
Yes.
And I agree with that. But it's a percentage of the work, and it's maybe 20% of the work at best.
Okay.
There's always, I believe in sprint zeros as well, where the UX team from the beginning is sort of doing foundational work. The minute somebody says, we need, like, that's your cue, you're off and running, right? There's investigation that has to be done. There's strategy work that has to be done. So I agree with that part. But once the sprint starts, you got to be working in tandem. You got to be marching in the same step, exploring things at the same time, comparing notes at the same time. Nobody should be doing anything without the other person's input, in my opinion. I think you waste a tremendous amount of time, not just weeks, months.
My statement might have been miscommunicated.
Hey, we can disagree. It's okay.
Yeah, I totally agree. No, I just think when you hit a sprint, there has to be a certain DOR from a UX perspective. There has to be a certain percentage where just me. Well, I would like them to be comfortable. They can't start a sprint with a DOR of 0%. That's why if they work ahead, the definition of ready is kind of there, and it's like, we're still going to figure it out once we hit the ground running together. But when they go into a sprint without like no DOR and nothing is really kind of formulated, that's
you still have to know I agree with that. You still have to know what the definition of ready is. I mean,
yeah, absolutely. That's where I kind of, sometimes I can get miscommunicated with that statement.
No. I think it makes total sense. It's more a matter of checking in. It's not so much that you're developing every single thing together. It's a check-in. It's people talking to each other twice a day, at the very least, and saying, here's what I got. Does this present any problems for you? Or what do you think of this idea? Is it going to work? On both sides. And the teams who I've managed to convince to try this for 2 weeks, and they fight me. I'm like, look, just try it for 2 weeks. What's working? What you're doing right now is not working. That's the reason I'm in this room in the first place. So just try it. Try it for a week. If it doesn't work, if you hate it, if you think it sucks, go back to doing what you were doing. I mean, I don't care. It doesn't matter to me. 9 times out of 10, I've had 4 teams try this and stick to it and keep it. And like, we're never doing this in a different way because it eliminates so much friction and so much misunderstanding and so much back and forth and so much waste. My God. Yeah. Rework. Are you kidding me?
Yeah. That's
crazy.
That's the absolute truth. And I'm going to do some product placement, Joe.
Do it. Do it.
But that's what we preach in DesignOps Aligned. We're very into sustainable design where we don't waste. And the collaboration, as you mentioned, is one of our key things that we implement that, we're trying to just cut waste as much as possible. It's one of the key things my colleagues are very kind of passionate about, making sure that nothing is going to waste. That time is really used. That you have a meeting agenda, we're going to get something out of it. Okay, we're going to record a meeting, but we're only going to keep it for 1 or 2 days because storing that meeting costs time on the server or costs data. So sustainable design is one of our key things. And that's what you just mentioned is one of the key factors to build sustainable design, because you are eliminating so much rework by having that good collaboration between teams.
Yeah, I agree. Totally agree.
Joe, we're coming up to the end of the show, and I wanted to ask 2 things because you make a good point about growing your UX career in there as well. I don't know if this is your quote or Leah's quote, but I'm going to quote it.
We're going to find out.
We're going to find out. And you say in the book, do a project brief. Ask yourself and your client hard questions about timelines, goals, and how success will be defined. Is that your one, or?
I think that's both of us to some degree, but I mean, we're so aligned on all this stuff. Like I said, when I read the book 10 years ago, I'm like, I could have written this because I agreed with all of it. My guess is that, a lot of that is, I don't know whose it is, but it sounds like both of us. That's the truth, right? People say, well, why would you write a project brief? It's a waste of time. No one's going to read it. It's not the point. The point of doing it is to get clear. And the point of doing it is to have a conversation that gets other people clear as well when you get those answers. People think that the purpose of having, like a stakeholder interview, for example, is to put a bunch of things down on a piece of paper and then have this immovable set of rules that you are now going to adhere to. It's really not the purpose. The purpose is to make sure that the two of you are on the same page. It's to make sure that you understand their world and they understand how you can help them. Every single time something like that happens is an opportunity for you, whether you're a team of one or a team of many, right? Or a team of a few. It's an opportunity for you to let people know, I care about what you care about, right? The things that you're after matter to me. I want to make sure that the work I am doing speaks to those things, gets you those things. It enables collaboration. It's not about grilling somebody to get answers that are suddenly magically going to give you the answer to the universe. It's not the case. Again, if there's a theme in this book, I kind of think that's it. Like, here's how you exist inside an organization. And here's how you help other people understand the value of what you do without you having to constantly argue for it all the time. Here's how you do better work. Here's how you make better strategic decisions. Here's how, when people see your work, they're like, I would have never thought of doing it that way. But you're right. It serves these problems that we said we had, and it serves this problem that our customers said they had. And right, it's just a different way of existing. I mean, hell, you mentioned boot camps a while ago. I mean, the entire reason I started my own academy was partly in reaction to all that. Because I felt like what was being taught was like, are you kidding me? Like, where is the stuff? Where is the day-to-day stuff? How do I exist in the world? Yeah. So again, there's this weird serendipity that runs through my career. And I mean, founding the UX 365 Academy was part of that. Being asked, reading this book a million years ago was part of that. Reading Jesse's book was part of that. And now being asked to be a part of this I said this online, this is like a full circle moment for me. I just couldn't think of anything more appropriate or more perfect or more in line with all the things that I believe. I mean, you want to talk about fortunate. That's me.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. Definitely. I also want to ask you one more thing. Now, with the current job market, everyone is moving into freelancing. And I like this quote. It really resonates with me, this quote. Might be yours, it might be theirs. If you position yourself as a consultant rather than a freelancer, your time and work may be perceived as more valuable. Why did you write that? Who wrote that, and why did you write that?
I honestly don't know who wrote that. But here's the thing. We would both, I think, vehemently agree that that's true. I've said as much in a course that my wife and I did on starting and running your own freelance business.
Hmm.
We said the same thing. How you position yourself matters greatly. Perception is reality.
Yeah.
That's a fact. If I say I'm a freelancer, there's this sort of sense of like, we'll bring you in when we need you and we'll tell you what to do and you'll do it and it'll be relatively inexpensive. The perception of a consultant is you've got a problem you can't solve on your own and you need that outside consultant's help to figure it out. Yeah. It's a very different thing. And in some cases, the work may be the same, right? But how you define it matters a great deal.
Absolutely. And it's literally a switch of two words. And you can see the emotional value it brings when you just switch those two words and they mean exactly the same thing, from our perspective. But from a receiver, the word consultant means I know my shit. I know what I'm going to do, and you're going to literally benefit from my services. And as you mentioned, a freelancer, the perception is I can take you whenever I want. Sometimes I can even delay the payment. And it comes with such stigma that it's unbelievable when you just switch those two words, how effective it is. So,
I agree.
Before we wrap up, and the last bit of this book really mentions about the future of UX. Obviously, can't have a podcast without talking about AI, but you do mention about this, and I want to get your 2 cents before we wrap up about this. Where do you see the challenges ahead and for UX people really embracing it within their work?
You can't imagine how timely that question is. Partly because I literally wrapped the last day of editing for a course that I'm doing on designing AI-driven products, all right, for UXers and product designers. Basically fundamentals of how do I dip my toe in this water, right? What do you need to know about how Gen AI in particular, how those products work? Because my thing is this, you're going to be asked at some point to help design an AI-driven product from the ground up, or you're going to be asked to integrate AI into an existing product. And if you don't have some foundational basic knowledge of how all this works, right, high level, you're going to be left out of that equation. All right, we already work in a situation where, we've said all throughout this talk, it's all too easy for executives or product managers or marketing or development to leave designers and UXers out of the equation when big strategic decisions get made. So unless you have some foundational knowledge in the areas of AI and Gen AI and how it works and why it works the way it works and how to do it ethically and responsibly and everything else, you're not going to have a seat at that table either. Right? They're going to do it without you. So it's a conversation that you need to start having. It's a place where you need to start poking your nose around because it's coming, whether we like it or not. Now, like a lot of people, I have a lot of ethical concerns about AI, about how it's used, about it being used responsibly, about issues of diversity, inclusiveness, how it can exclude and marginalize and harm people, quite frankly. Copyright issues, right? Infringement on artists and illustrators and photographers. There are a lot of issues there. But again, this is stuff that I think that we absolutely have to start learning about. So it is not enough to take this hardline stance of like, AI is evil and I'm not dealing with it. You're not going to have a job if you take that stance. Okay. It is coming. It is here. It is going to be part of your work, whether you accept that or not. Right. So I think it's something that we absolutely have to have a hand in, as imperfect as it is right now. I think ignoring it is dangerous for everybody. For everybody. If anybody's uniquely positioned to try and make sure that this stuff is safer and more responsible, it is most certainly us. Right. So again, that was the reason I wanted to do this course. I'm like, I have some things to say about this and I need to, and it was new to me as well. Right. So I had to immerse myself and learn. And I learned partly because 2 of my clients roped me into some AI driven projects, It's here. It's here. So I think it's a terribly important thing to wrap your head around. Now, and I talk about some of this in the course as well, there's also some ways that AI is being used in doing our jobs as well. And I think some of that is of massive benefit because it frees us up. I've seen more than a couple instances where having it deal with tactical work of crunching data, for example, right? Just to spotting commonalities between research components, or handling details of layout issues or mechanical issues for different breakpoints of an app. It's something that a human being, to me, someone who's on the design and UX side of the fence, like that is wasted time for us. Your power is up here. Where you're most effective is up here. And the longer you spend doing tactical work, the less time you have to exercise that part. So to me, anything that gets us our time back and gets us more space to think and more space to dig into research and more space to analyze what's in front of us, I'm all for it. So again, I think to pretend that like, well, I'm never going to do that, man, that's crazy.
Yeah. No, if anyone takes that hard stance, it's just that you ain't going to have a job in the future. It is here. It's coming thick and fast, literally. If you don't jump on the bandwagon, I would say to anyone listening to this podcast, take as much time as you can to learn it because it is the future. It is going to be our way of working. And you don't want to be left behind.
Yep. It's October 2nd. So the course should be launched in a week or two here.
Brilliant. Yeah. Let us know. We'll put the link in our podcast, and we will definitely put a link to the book. I am actually looking forward to actually having the hardback version. As everyone can see, I printed this out. I'm going to expose Joe because he sent me the PDF and I had to print out 323 pages and put notes. So yeah, I'm waiting to buy the hardback at one point. So you thought I'm going to hide that one, Joe? No, I'm going to keep this. I'm going to keep it as it is. I think it's.
Or when I see you, I'll sign it.
Oh, definitely. I'm going to hold you to that. I'm definitely going to hold you to that.
Okay.
Joe, it has been an absolute pleasure to speak to you. And I can't thank you enough for coming on the show. I think, as mentioned, I've only just skimmed this book, and I'm really looking forward to deep diving it. And I think I'm looking forward to anyone listening to this podcast to purchase it, really take the time to read it. And there's so much in there that you can benefit. And please message Joe on your findings and anything you find enlightening from it, because it's absolutely amazing. So well done, Joe, and well done, Leah, for putting this out. It's absolutely brilliant.
Thank you.